Alright, so here's a topic that I wanted to talk about. Do I need a ground for a full wave loop antenna? Well, you can take my opinion or don't take my opinion, but let's just go search the topic and see what we get. A full wave loop antenna does not necessarily require a ground, but using a ground or a parasitic wire can improve its performance. Experimenting with grounding can enhance the gain of the antenna system, and this is like some kind of like, AI type of thing. Let's see what they say specifically. Grounding for a full wave loop antennas. The general requirement of full wave loop antenna does not necessarily require a ground. It can function effectively as a standalone antenna. However, grounding can enhance the performance in certain situations. Benefits of grounding: improved gain. Grounding can improve the gain in the antenna, especially in communication systems operating below 10 megahertz. Reducing the noise. The ground can help minimize radio frequency interference, RFI. Considerations. Antenna consideration. If the loop is used in a balanced configuration, grounding may not be essential. However, adding a ground can still provide benefits. Loop size and heights. The effectiveness of grounding may depend on the size and height of the loop. Larger loops may see more significant improvements with grounding. Conclusion. While a full wave loop antenna can operate without a ground, adding one can enhance its performance by improving gain, reducing noise, particularly in challenging environments. And then, we have all this other different stuff that we can look up, and other people have opinions, and, a lot of them aren't really experts, and neither am I. And there is a lot of debate as far as, how should you ground things? Should you ground your antenna? What's the difference between an RF ground and an electrical ground? And are you going to create a ground loop through your equipment? And all sorts of interesting topics. My personal experience with it is that grounding it makes it a little quieter. And I just like to give it an RF ground, which is totally not going to do anything for lightning protection or electrical protection. And I feed my loop, it's about 270 feet of wire. It's up somewhere between 10 and 25 feet at the highest point. It's not even. I have a bunch of fiberglass poles that are from a broken leftover step-IR beam. I didn't even know that that's actually what they were until years later. Somebody had painted it, and the paint started to peel off, and I could read the letters of step-IR underneath it. Some of those poles are 15 feet long, some of them are 20 feet long, and I've got them in the kind of clay dirt in the backyard holding up the wire. And then the wire goes through some trees that go in front of the house. So my loop just goes around the house, and I have to stay away from the back because in Arizona they run the power lines behind the houses in the alleyway, and so you just want to stay away from that as much as possible. And basically the line runs behind the house, it comes up along the side pretty close to where I'm at, so I have to stay away from that also. So the only good thing is it doesn't come up into the middle, but and we have a fairly large front yard that's not really accessible because of the way they do everything here. Anyway, I ground the coax at the loop. I don't use a balun. I don't use anything. I'm directly feeding my loop with coax. It hangs above where we're sitting right now. There's a pole right above the door of the shack, and the feed point is right there. There's some RG213 that comes out through a hole in the eaves, and it hangs there. About maybe 20 feet of RG8X is hanging from the feed point. And I have a bunch of coax coiled up on a 3D printer spool, and that's hanging from that. And that coax comes off of that spool, and that goes to a barrel connector. I wrap some 14 gauge wire around the barrel connector, and it goes to this little rod that's in the ground over here near the door. And I disconnect my 213 coming out of the eaves to that piece right there. That's how I do it. It seems to work good enough for me on 80 meters where I don't need an amplifier and everybody else does. And nobody complains that they can't hear me, and if you know anything about people on 80 meters, they usually bitch and whine. So that's how I've been running it for years. I used to run balance line with a Johnson KW Matchbox. It didn't seem like it worked any better. It didn't seem like it was worth all the trouble and all the hassle. And you had to tune the tuner. You couldn't rely upon the radio tuner. See, the way that I do it right now is it runs into here, and then it goes to my big MFJ 989, or the 98, 999. I guess you could call it a 9,982. It's a big tuner. It's not your typical MFJ legal limit tuner, and it's actually, this tuner is actually 2,500 watts. I don't know if that's peak or RMS, but it uses edge wound stuff. It's got vents in it. It doesn't work without being plugged in as far as the meter goes. It's a healthy size tuner for MFJ, which, as we all know, you can pretty much divide MFJ's rating in half, and you got your real rating. I didn't actually plan on buying it. A guy that I got the 3000 from, we were making a partial trade, and he showed up with it, and I forget what he wanted for it, like 150 bucks. I believe when these came out, they were like 700, and they discontinued them somewhere, I think around 2015. And this one was never right. It was hard to crank because it was out of alignment. And it looks like the guy that it came from had bought it from an open box from HRO. So somebody else bought it and it wasn't quite right, and they returned it, and then he bought it and he never fixed it. But it's been a really good tuner. And unlike the other one, it has a balun on the input. It has a 1-to-1 balun on the input. It's really a different design, completely different. It's not an L match or anything like that, but it still has, you know, your typical, you know, T match, but it's got this balun on the input, and there isn't any balun on the output. So it's not like using, you know, your typical MFJ design. It's a completely different tuner. But what I like to do is be able to use the tuner if I want to, or go direct. And then I can let the radio tune my loop antenna. Well, I can't do that if I'm using the Johnson. There's no bypass mode on a Johnson. So that's why I chose to just quit running ladder line. But back to the loop stuff. Oh, I just got a notice. The game warden said there's lightning. And I'm not even hooked up. In fact, that was what got me to thinking about this video, because I had disconnected everything earlier, and I wanted to improve my RF ground. Try and get rid of some of this noise. I had a lot of noise here from the solar that's going on in here. We've got a big inverter over here making a lot of noise as far as fan noise. There's another not so quiet inverter in the house on a 24 volt system, and that one really is the one that really puts the spikes throughout the bands that you see when I'm on a radio with a pan adapter. So anyway, I honestly tell everybody, run a loop antenna. It doesn't need to be up high. It doesn't need to be perfectly square. It doesn't need to be perfectly round. And it's just, I've got a Hustler 5B TV. I've got an off-center fed dipole. I've got a G5RV. I got an 80 meter dipole. I've tried a lot of these different popular antennas, and they don't even come close. They're not even close at all. Not even close. And they're a lot noisier. But, you know, it's okay. I'm not going to sit here and try and convince people that the best antenna is a loop antenna. The people are very stubborn, and they want to believe what they want to believe. And if you want to go out and buy a Buckmaster or an Alpha Delta and pay some ridiculous money for some store-bought antenna that you could have made yourself for a quarter of the price, that's on you. You know, if you want to believe that that antenna is better than a loop because of the name, that's on you. You know, it's a waste of my time and energy to convince people that don't want to listen. And I've been doing this long enough. I've been living in different places, and I've had the same antenna put up in different places, and some of the other antennas in different places, to see over and over again that the results are exactly the same, even with different circumstances, even at different heights, even with different objects around it. And every time I do an A and B comparison, even on 10 meters, where everybody should be vertical, my horizontal loop outperforms anything that I have. I've got an IMAX 2000. Now granted, I have not put that thing up high enough, nor do I want to put that thing up 30, 40, 50 feet up in the air, flapping around like a wet noodle. I'm sure that it would probably outperform it, but at some low level it does not. And you sure ain't hiding it. So the Hustler 5B TV is a ground mounted antenna. That's how it was intended to be, with radials ground mounted, and the 10 meter section is a quarter wave. So there's no secret there that that's not going to perform real well. But it's a good antenna. The 5B TV is a good antenna. You can hide it, you can lower it, you can take it down, you can take it portable. I mean, it's a little bit big for that, but you can totally do it. But it's a compromise to be had. And so, basically, I've just found that the loop is the best antenna. And there are lots of things on the internet where you can read up about this particular antenna. There are many different people that have written about it. Many different opinions on how it works, how it radiates, how you should feed it, what the impedance will be if you feed it at different places. Mine seems to be about 70 ohms. But my height above ground and where I'm feeding it, mine is fed at a corner, and we're basically looking at a square. Now let's see what they would show here. Square. See, they show feeding it here, but I'm feeding it like there. It says in theory a perfect circle would have slightly more gain than a regular polygon, blah blah. If we look at the radiation pattern, fed at either the corner or one side, there is not a lot of practical difference among them. Square, the corner, gain 3.19 dB gain. That's over a dipole. That's a lot of gain. 129 ohms that they're reading. Effect on feed point position. This is a really good page here. I don't know if the information is completely accurate, but I mean, I read up on it. Height in meters. Unfortunately, I don't really know what that conversion rate is offhand. But the height above ground does affect the impedance. There's some interesting charts here. So if you do it just right, you can get it to where, like fed with coax, almost matches it. And you probably could match it with a 75 ohm quarter wave matching piece. Yeah, so what do they say here? Impedance. And you're not going to get it a wavelength above the ground on 80 meters unless you're like got like a lot of room. So there's a lot of information on this page. This one here is practicalantennas.com, theory, loop, full wave. I don't know what this one is. Amateur radio, stack exchange, 80 meter loop, loop on the ground, loop antennas, Palomar engineers. Let's see what the experts have to say. Cookies should be illegal. I really feel like websites should not be allowed to track you. They should not be able to store information. It's bullshit. It's called fucking spying. Full wave loop, aka sky loop. I don't know why they call it that. This antenna is horizontally polarized and should be mounted as high as possible, but works well at low heights of 10 to 30 feet. They are quieter than a dipole or a vertical and have a broader bandwidth and usually outperform a dipole antenna. To determine the appropriate circumference in feet of a full wavelength loop, use the formula 1005 divided by frequency in megahertz equals length in feet. The feed point impedance of a full wave loop antenna is theoretically in the vicinity of 120 ohms and requires a 2-to-1 impedance transformer for single band loops or a 4-to-1 balun to match on multiple bands. You will also need a feed line choke, or better yet, just get a hybrid 4-to-1 blah blah. I don't believe in any of this bullshit, to be honest with you. But 4-to-1, I don't believe in all that crap. And of course, this is Palomar Engineers. They want you to buy their product, so they're going to say that it works. When it comes to a loop, I just think it's a waste of fucking time and it's a possible point of failure. But and it doesn't really matter. So that's just their opinion on it. And they go into other stuff here, and you can, read all this fun stuff. They show their chokes and stuff that they sell. It doesn't talk about anything about grounding it, though. The main thing that I don't like is okay, so let's say your Astron 35 power supply is grounded. Okay? Is that in any way, shape connected to the negative output, or is that negative output floating from that ground? Now, I tested this before and I don't remember what it was, but I think it's floating. Well, let's just say it's not, okay? And you have a mismatched loop antenna and you're transmitting, then it's going to try and radiate against the coax shield, and it might radiate on the equipment, and it might try and do its thing. So now you've got RF on your power supply and the case of your radio and all sorts of stuff. There's also the other thing that people always, for some reason, don't seem to believe is possible. But if you have an antenna switch, at least say you have a loop on one antenna and you have a vertical on the other, they're going to interact with each other regardless if that switch is on or off or in the grounded position, because the grounded side of the switch does not disconnect. It's hooked to all the antennas. If you got 5 antennas hooked up, they're all connected on the ground side. There is going to be some kind of reactance in between the circuit. It is going to have an effect. And also, that's why I never hook more than one antenna to a radio. It's absolutely fucking stupid. It's cool that they had radios that have, you know, more than one antenna port, but like, it doesn't make practical sense. You're changing the whole situation when you hook 2 antennas to a radio. They're commonly connected to the ground, regardless of what you think. Now, if you have a ground at the output before you go to the other deals, then supposedly RF-wise, you know, it's okay and it looks like a electrical short, but RF it doesn't. Well, it's still going to react, and that's why it's really hard to actually do an A and B comparison without just actually switching feed lines. If you have them both on a switch, they're both connected on the ground side. And people argue about it. I really don't care what you say or what your evidence is. I firsthand can tell the difference by disconnecting the other antenna that's not being used. I can hear the difference. Physically, I can hear it with my ears in the receiver. So I know that it's doing something. So, there's just so many things that can cause problems too, you know? So, the easier way to do it is keep it simple. Keep it simple. I prefer not to do any switches and crazy shit and this and that. You can build up enough RF on a grounded antenna switch to blow up another radio that's on that antenna switch. I've done it. They blew out the front end on an 830 by doing that. I used to keep a B&W antenna switch that grounds itself when it's not in those other positions. I had like 4 or 5 radios hooked up, and I was tuning up my 102 on AM, and took out the front end of the TS830 that was also on that antenna switch. So, yeah, I don't know. I want to keep things very simple when it comes to that. And a lot of people don't talk about that, and they just, for some reason, I don't know, they just think their antenna switch is perfect. And then the one is, they really love those alpha delta antenna switches. I've got a video where I took one of those apart. They're absolutely cheap ass crap. Yeah, they look cool, they feel really well made, but when you open them up inside, you will see that they are junk. They are nothing more than junk. I mean, they make MFJ look like a Cadillac. So, Simon has a bunch of stuff on loops that you can read about, and but there's not a lot of information about grounding them. But I believe that you should ground your loop before it goes into the shack. I just think it kind of helps. It is a terminated type of antenna, so you're not going to really build up voltage like a dipole, but it's still, with lightning storms in the area, it's a good idea to have it there, just kind of give it a place to discharge to, I think. So anyway, that's kind of my idea on loops and grounding and antenna switches. Feel free to leave your comments down below.